Do you believe that even a well-crafted plan to commit a crime can end up completely falling apart in a matter of seconds? Many people think that when planning a robbery or an unlawful action, they are in absolute control of the situation. But the truth is that life has a surprising way of reversing roles, especially when we least expect it. Imagine the scene. A group of young criminals decides to break into a small neighborhood grocery store, believing that nothing could go wrong. Haste, arrogance, and the certainty that nothing would hit them lead them to act quickly, without thinking about the consequences. They look confident, certain that the escape will be easy, that the stolen money will be enough to escape without problems. But what they did not imagine was that nature itself, with its strength and unpredictability, would be waiting for them in a way they could never have foreseen. Stay with me until the end, because what you will discover now may surprise you. A true story, which shows how life can reverse roles in the blink of an eye. Just like in life, evil often seems to be in control, dominating the scene and leaving everything in front of it. But suddenly a force of nature emerges in a ruthless and unexpected way. This is not just a crime story, but a lesson in how punishment often comes from where you least expect it. Young people who believed they were in charge end up being victims of an absurd, almost surreal situation, which demonstrates that the universe has its own way of balancing things. And all this happens in an instant, when they least imagine it, turning this story into a symbol of how blind justice can be, but also ruthless. If you think you know all the ways to escape danger, get ready to see a twist that defies any prediction. Next, we will delve into the details of this unusual scene, where nature decided to do justice in a way that no one could have predicted. You will see how life itself, with its strength and unpredictability, often deals the final blow, leaving everything in a situation of complete chaos, and, at the same time, learning for those who are attentive. The story that follows is more than just an episode. It is a reflection on the power of nature, the fragility of the human being, and the moment when evil finds its own punishment. And this story teaches us something important about how justice often comes from where we least expect it, and in a way that no one can predict. It's a reminder that no matter how hard we try to plan our steps, life has its own ways of surprising us, especially when we're in the wrong. The force of nature, with its unpredictability, has shown that even the most confident criminals can become victims of something as simple and at the same time as powerful as a swarm of angry marimbondos. This scene serves as a clear metaphor that good, somehow, always finds its way to rebalance things, even if in an unexpected way. If you identify with this story, or have a similar experience, leave here in the comments what touched you the most, or what you think it teaches us about justice, karma, or even about the power of nature. Your opinion is very important and helps create an enriching conversation with those who also like to reflect on these topics. Also, if this content made sense to you, enjoy the video and share it with friends or family who may also be inspired or surprised by this story. And of course, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because here we continue to bring stories that show how life has its own plans and always challenges us to think beyond. Your participation is what makes this space grow and reach more people, strengthening this community of learning and reflections. We look forward to seeing you in the next episodes, because there are still many amazing stories to come, and we want you to be together with us on this journey of discovery. It was a night that seemed quiet, almost too quiet, in a neighborhood that had routine marked by a tranquility that seemed untouchable. The lights of the houses were low, reflecting an atmosphere of calm that seemed even a little desolate. The empty streets, with few cars passing by from time to time, created an atmosphere of isolation, a heavy silence that seemed to envelop everything around. In the center of this scene, a small grocery store remained open, illuminated by a yellowish light that spread from a dim lamp on the ceiling. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where the daily routine of shopping, quick conversations and exchanging glances was repeated day after day, like a quiet neighborhood tradition. At that moment, the grocery store seemed more like an extension of the street itself, a kind of refuge from a solitude shared by a few. However, behind that semblance of normalcy, a shadow slowly approached. A group of young people, with fixed stares and hurried steps, moved behind the houses with a clear intention of doing something that would break all that peace. They believed that nothing could go wrong, that the ease of acting impulsively and without thinking about the consequences would ensure the success of their action. Perhaps motivated by a desperate search for quick cash, or simply by an attitude of senseless rebelliousness, they decided to raid that small trade, confident that they could escape before anyone noticed or any trouble arose. The atmosphere of tension was beginning to build in the shadow, with the subtle sound of hurried footsteps and the silence broken only by the distant echo of a deserted street. Each movement seemed charged with a quiet intensity, almost as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for the outcome of an action that seemed inevitable. The grocery store at that time seemed almost vulnerable, like a weak spot in a wall of tranquility. The young criminals, however, did not realize that what seemed like an easy opportunity was actually a trap that life itself was preparing for them. The atmosphere, charged with expectation and tense calmness, created a kind of duality. On the one hand, the illusion of power of the invaders. On the other, a feeling that something greater was lurking, ready to manifest at any moment. As they approached with steady steps, the silence of the night seemed to thicken, as if the universe itself was closely watching that scene. The steps became faster, the hearts quickened, and everything seemed to be moving at an almost hypnotic pace, like a play that reaches its most crucial moment. Against this backdrop of isolation, the grocery store came to represent more than just a neighborhood store. It became a symbol of vulnerability, a silent play where the drama of an ordinary night was preparing for a turn no one could have predicted. And as the scene unfolded, the night still held many secrets, ready to be revealed at the exact moment when the unexpected happened, changing everything definitively. The young men, confident in their own audacity and blinded by their own actions, entered the grocery store with an aggressive posture, almost defying the world to try to prevent what they believed to be an easy victory. The tension-laden atmosphere intensified as soon as they walked through the door, with stares and steady hands that held improvised weapons or objects that could be used as such. The environment, which was once a symbol of routine and security, became the scene of an explicit threat to those who were nearby. The employees, taken by surprise, tried to remain calm, but the expression of fear and concern was evident on those faces. Their every move seemed like an attempt to show that they were only there to fulfill a task, but in fact, they knew that they were in a situation of extreme danger, surrounded by a real and imminent threat. The sense of danger spread through space like a dense cloud, making it clear that any wrong move could trigger a violent reaction. The robbers, with cold, determined looks, demanded that the money be handed over immediately, without room for negotiations or hesitation. They believed that the success of the operation was guaranteed, and that as soon as they took what they wanted, they could safely escape. The illusion of control, however, was beginning to prove fragile. Every second felt like an eternity, and the climate of impunity they carried mixed with a confidence that actually hid a growing vulnerability. The situation was made even more tense by the fact that any detail could give a clue that something wasn't right, and that risk was something they weren't willing to consider. However, what they did not realize, while feeling invincible in that moment of adrenaline, was that a sequence of simple, almost banal events could turn that whole scene of violence into something completely unexpected. The haste to flee, the attempt to maintain the posture of the one who dominates the situation, caused them to be distracted for an instant. It was at this very moment that fate decided to act, in a way that no one could have imagined. A small detail, almost invisible to the unprepared eye, was about to become the key piece for a twist that would change everything. And while they focused on the money and the quick escape, nature, silent but relentless, prepared their impact move, a kind of punishment that would come instantly, directly, and inevitably. The mood of danger became even more palpable when the young men realized too late that their thoughtless act had triggered a chain of events that went beyond any control. Believing that the escape would be simple, they advanced to the exit with their heads full of plans for how to escape from that situation. But at that moment, a hidden force entered the scene, completely changing the script of that episode. And it was precisely at this moment that history took a turn that no one could have predicted, revealing that no matter how much human beings try to get away from their own actions, life, with its strength and unpredictability, always finds a way to balance things out. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this twist reveals a hidden truth that many are unaware of: the impact of impulsive decisions and the power of nature itself to do justice in ways that seem even surreal. At that instant, Mental agitation and accelerated fear dominated the minds of young criminals. With the adrenaline pumping strong, they believed that the escape was already a matter of a few seconds, almost a certain victory after the failed robbery attempt. Nervousness took over, making each step faster, more uncoordinated, as if haste itself were a weapon against them. The back door seemed the only viable way out at that moment, the shortest way to escape from that impending chaos. The feeling of momentary relief invaded them, as they realized that they were leaving behind what in their head was just a frustrated experience. They believed that by walking through that door, they were free from danger, free from the police, free from anything that could reach them in any way. And so, with hasty steps, they began to run, almost not realizing how quickly they were moving away from the scene of the crime, indulging in the illusion that they had already won the battle. The sound of footsteps echoed through the walls of the grocery store, mixed with the sound of their panting breaths, while anxiety turned into a kind of hope that everything was over. But the hidden truth, which they had not yet realized, was that nature itself, silent and implacable, was still watching them, waiting for the exact moment to act. In that instant, fear and haste blinded them to any sign of danger, leaving them vulnerable to any detail that could radically change the course of that story. Escape, however quick, seemed to be their only goal, a desperate attempt to escape from what they themselves impulsively and irresponsibly created. But the sense of control was only an illusion, a fleeting glow that would soon fade with the impact of a revelation that seemed to be hidden in the shadows of that moment. The young men, as they launched their escape, did not realize that what seemed to be an easy way out, an emergency door, a free path, hid something that would turn the game definitively. Every step, every heavy breath, every attempt to keep calm was about to turn into a reminder of a fatal mistake. Adrenaline, which once seemed to be their best ally, now became a weapon against them, as haste made them more distracted, more impulsive, more at the mercy of a greater force they could not control. And it was exactly at this moment of maximum vulnerability that the unexpected happened. Without warning, a small vibration in the air, a barely perceptible movement, was enough to change the course of that night. The silence that seemed absolute was broken by a presence they had not considered: the marimbondos, an immense amount of angry insects, activated by some previous disturbance, or perhaps by the simple fact that they had been knocked out of their nest, suddenly appeared. Like a cloud of furious moving in a single direction, they mercilessly attacked, turning the desperate escape into a chaotic race, a real battle against an invisible and ruthless enemy. That instant, marked by anxiety and the hope of escape, turned into a scene of horror where nature showed its brute and implacable strength. Young people, who previously thought only of momentary freedom, began to run in despair, dropping everything on the street: stolen money, courage, an attempt to deceive the universe with their illusion of invincibility. The screams of pain and agitation mixed with the sound of their hands trying to get rid of the insects, while the feeling of extreme fear dominated their minds and bodies. There was no more reasoning, no strategy. There was only a struggle for survival. The adrenaline that propelled them seemed, in fact, a reminder that nature itself, with its strength and its unpredictability, still had the power to reverse any situation, no matter how controlled it may seem. Thus, in that moment of chaos, all their confidence was shattered in the face of a punishment that came quickly, brutally, and totally unexpected, leaving a lesson that would echo in the heads of everyone who witnessed that surreal scene. They were so focused on escape that in their haste they didn't realize something else was about to happen. As they ran down the narrow alley, the disorderly footsteps caused an abandoned crate to be knocked over, hitting the stone floor hard and emitting a dry sound that echoed through the silence of the night. In that instant, that whole scene of chaos became even more surreal. The noise was like a silent warning, a kind of alert that seemed to go unnoticed by them, but which actually activated a chain reaction in the surrounding nature. What they didn't know was that the inside of that crate contained something that could change everything: an active nest of marimbondos, which until then rested in peace, protected by the very negligence of those who disturbed it. Just a few seconds after impact, one thing was clear: the worst had just begun. The insects, awakened by sound and vibration, came out relentlessly and aggressively, like a cloud of furious ones moving towards the invaders with a blind fury. His stingers, which were previously dormant, have now become lethal weapons, capable of causing severe pain and severe allergic reaction. For young people, the scene turned into complete chaos in a matter of moments. The cry of pain and surprise filled the alley as they tried to get rid of the insects that mercilessly attacked them. The feeling of being surrounded by a force of nature that until then they had neglected was like a brutal blow to the illusion of invincibility they carried. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, they struggled desperately, trying to get rid of the marimbondos while their hands and arms were covered with stingers. Sharp pain, fear, and confusion mixed into a combination that made any logical reasoning difficult. What was once a quick escape turned into a fight for survival. The attack force of the insects was such that within a few seconds they were covered with bites and almost unable to move clearly. The feeling of helplessness took over, while the thought that everything had been caused by an impulsive decision and a momentary negligence became more and more evident. That seemingly small mistake had become a death trap. The scene had become a real lesson in impact, a cruel reminder that nature, with its strength and its unpredictability, always finds a way to take its toll. What seemed like a quick and inconsequential escape turned into a desperate race against pain and fate itself. The young people, who previously thought they were in control of the situation, were now being controlled by the insects who, furious, attacked without stopping. Each sting felt like a direct punishment, a punishment they themselves had brought on by underestimating what they could not see or understand. The streetlight, which once seemed only a silent witness, now seemed to shine in an ironic way, as if it were illuminating the hidden truth behind that whole scene. That nature, no matter how hard we try to dominate it, always has its own way of showing that the balance of the universe is something delicate and fleeting. And as they desperately tried to pull away, trying to get rid of the bugs and the pain that was growing by the second, one thing became clear: that fatal mistake had been something of a turning point. The simple act of knocking over a crate, which seemed like a trivial thing, eventually triggered a sequence of events that became a kind of collective punishment, a harsh lesson that one should not underestimate the forces that are beyond our control. And somehow that night became a kind of symbol of how impulsive decisions can turn a seemingly simple situation into a real battle for survival. Those young men, now covered in stings and in shock, had learned the hard way that the impact of a poorly planned action can go far beyond the obvious consequences, reaching to the core of everything they believed to be invincible. And it is exactly this lesson that remains, engraved in the memory of those who witnessed all this, that no matter how hard we try to escape, true transformation is born of our own decisions, and that sometimes punishment comes from where it is least expected, directly, quickly, and ruthlessly. In a matter of seconds, the silence of the night was abruptly torn by an avalanche of movement, sound, and chaos. The insects, awakened by the impact of the crate, came out of their hiding place in a fury that seemed to have no limits. A dark, pulsating cloud of angry marimbondos spread across the alley at an astonishing speed, like a living mass moving towards the invaders with brutal determination. His stingers, once dormant, now gleamed in the dim streetlight, ready to pounce. The speed with which they approached was frightening, a real flood of pain that spread through the bodies of young people who, at that moment, could only think of escape. There was no time for reasoning, just an instinctive reaction of panic, of trying to get away from what seemed like a merciless force of nature. Screams of pain and despair echoed as the assailants tried to get rid of the insects that surrounded them on all sides. The uncoordinated movements, the desperate attempt to move away, only increased the intensity of the attack. Each sting felt like a stab of pain, a cruel reminder that negligence or arrogance can come at too high a price. The ground, covered with stingers and scattered debris, was scarred by the chaos that ensued there. The feeling of helplessness took over each one, while their body, seized by a sharp pain, seemed to transform into an arena of suffering with no apparent way out. Some tried to get rid of the insects with their hands. Others took long, staggering steps in a desperate move to escape from that swarm of furious. But the harder they tried, the more the marimbondos multiplied, as if determined to exact what was their right, a punishment they themselves had provoked, by being disturbed and knocked down from their hiding place. The scene turned into a picture of horror and confusion. Screams of pain mingled with the sound of swift wings, the rustle of bodies struggling, the silence that once dominated the neighborhood. The adrenaline that drove young people to run in desperation turned into a battle of survival, The fear of standing there motionless and suffering was greater than any escape plan they could have made minutes before. Each movement became more difficult, each attempt to move away seemed like a struggle against an invisible force that pushed them into a state of complete panic. And as they rushed toward the street, staggering and screaming, it seemed as if the universe itself had decided that night was its punishment, a lesson that could not be ignored. The impact was devastating. The bites spread throughout the body, causing unbearable pain. The skin was marked by red, swollen spots, while the young people tried to get rid of those insects that seemed to have become an extension of their own body. The rapidity of the attack made it clear that the marimbondos were a force that could not be controlled or underestimated. Their stingers, once silent, now functioned as lethal weapons, marking each victim with a pain that seemed eternal. The feeling that everything had just become a matter of life and death settled in those moments of absolute chaos, and everything happened in a split second, as if nature itself had decided that silence and negligence would not go unpunished. The assailants, who until then believed they were in control of the situation, saw their confidence crumble in the face of the relentless onslaught. Their bodies, covered with stings, trembled with pain and fear as they desperately tried to pull away from what seemed like a force of divine punishment, a punishment they themselves had brought about. The pain was so much that some lost track of what was real. Fear took over their minds in an almost irrational way. The screams intensified, mixing with the sound of wings and the wheezing of pain, creating a frightening symphony of chaos. As they tried to hide, to flap their arms, to get rid of the stingers, one thing was clear: they had unleashed a reaction they could not control, a force that struck them in their own vulnerability, in proof that nature, with its brute force, always has its own way of doing justice. The scene of chaos and pain that unfolded in the alley eventually echoed through the walls in an almost natural way, as if the street itself was whispering a silent warning. The desperate cries of the young, mixed with the wheezing of the wings and the sound of stings, attracted the attention of those who lived nearby. Gradually, residents began to leave their homes, attracted by that unusual scene that seemed more like a nightmare than the reality of an ordinary night. Some, with expressions of surprise and even nervous mood, watched the situation with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Others, more frightened, approached slowly, almost hesitantly, as if afraid that something worse might happen there. But in general, everyone was there to witness that moment that seemed a real lesson of the force of nature, a punishment that came from an unexpected source and that seemed to be being fulfilled right there before their eyes. The community's reaction was swift, but charged with mixed emotions. Some began to laugh, perhaps at such an absurd scene. Others commented in a low voice, frightened by the brutality of that natural attack. Fear, however, was the predominant feeling, for no one doubted that it had been a just reaction, a kind of divine punishment for those who had found themselves above all, who had underestimated the power of life and its invisible laws. And as people approached, silence was imposed, as if the whole scene was revealing a hidden truth that is often hidden behind appearances. Everyone there understood somehow that the impact of that moment went beyond simple fright or momentary pain. It was a silent lesson that no matter how hard we try to plan our lives or control our actions, nature always has its way of showing that the balance of the universe is delicate and that arrogance or negligence can trigger unexpected consequences. The community itself, which previously had a routine of tranquility, began to reflect on what it had just witnessed. It was not only a scene of punishment, but also a revelation about the decisions we make and how they can turn into our greatest lesson, often in painful ways. Residents began to exchange glances, whispering to each other, sharing impressions and thoughts about what had happened there. Some commented that it seemed like a kind of natural justice, a punishment that came from a place that no one can control, that we did not choose, but that somehow always ends up reaching us. Others were more frightened, worried about what that scene might mean for the neighborhood, for the routine of everyone who lived there. And yet, they all had one thing in common. That night had become a landmark episode, a reminder that the impact of our actions often comes from a place we can't even imagine, an impact that, at the right time, reveals the hidden truth behind the appearance of control. What stuck in everyone's memory, there was the notion that the force of nature, no matter how distant or unpredictable it may seem, always finds a way to restore balance. And in that moment, That force had manifested itself in a cruel but just way. The young men, with their scarred bodies and desperate faces, were the symbol of a lesson that no one should forget. Impulsive decisions, the arrogance of thinking that everything is under control, can turn a simple action into a chain of devastating consequences. And while the residents looked on, some still laughed nervously, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Others reflected in silence, because, deep down, everyone knew that this was not just a punishment, but an opportunity to understand that life is a cycle of actions and reactions, where nature itself, with its brute force and its silent wisdom, always gives its answer. Thus there, in that moment of chaos and pain, a truth was revealed that few want to admit. The transformation is often born of the impact of the decision itself, and what seemed to be a punishment, in fact, is a lesson that is engraved in the soul of those who witness. And as the dust from that whole scene began to settle, the connection between action, consequence, and reflection lingered in the air, like a bridge leading to a deeper understanding about the impact of our choices on life's journey. When police arrived at the scene, they did not find the young offenders in the condition they thought they were, confident they had escaped without consequence. On the contrary, the scenario that presented itself was devastating. The assailants were there, lying on the ground, covered with stings, with faces marked by expressions of pain and hopelessness. Their bodies shook involuntarily, and their clothes were torn and dirty with dust, sweat, and blood from the bites. The scene was almost humiliating, a defeat they could not deny. The effect of natural punishment, which previously seemed only a fictional story or a metaphor, had materialized in a cruel and definitive way. There was no more strength or courage in that group. Only the heavy silence of those who had been completely overcome by their own actions and by the life force that, silent and implacable, took its toll. The impact of that moment of humiliation was something that no one could simply ignore. The young men's eyes, which had once shone with arrogance and confidence, were now empty, reflecting a mixture of physical and emotional pain. The shame of having been caught so easily, the shame of having been overcome by a force they despised, all this mingled in the atmosphere of that place. The police, who soon mobilized, observed everything with a mixture of surprise and reflection. It was not just about arresting criminals, but about understanding that what was there was a concrete demonstration that the universe somehow always finds its balance. Natural justice is not something that needs human laws or punishments imposed by someone outside. It is a force that acts silently and constantly, collecting its debt according to the actions we take. When thinking about the scene, it is clear that that episode brought a profound lesson to the entire community. It was not a simple punishment, but a confirmation that the impact of impulsive decisions and disregard for the invisible laws of the universe can be devastating. Young people, in trying to escape a consequence, ended up becoming victims of a punishment that came from a source they completely neglected. And in doing so, they had to face the humiliating condition of those who were defeated by their own arrogance, by their negligence, by an attitude of contempt for the greater force that governs the balance of life. It is as if the universe has fairly and inevitably restored order, making it clear that true justice needs no external appeals or impositions. It is part of a natural cycle which works silently but unbeatably. What remains as a reflection is that often the greatest punishment does not come from a sentence or a prison, but from the very impact of our actions. When we act impulsively, arrogantly, or in disregard of the laws that govern the universe, we are setting the stage for a consequence that can be far more humiliating than any punishment imposed by anyone. The force of nature, which manifests itself in ways we often fail to foresee, shows that the impact of a decision can be devastating, leaving invisible marks and deep scars on the soul. Those young people learned hard and fast that the impact of their actions is not something we can control or run away from. It is a force that, once unleashed, runs its course, taking its toll according to the intensity of our negligence or arrogance. And in the end, everyone realized that true justice is that which comes from within, which manifests itself in the form of inevitable consequences, and which, often, only show us the hidden truth that we ignore, that our actions carry a weight that we cannot ignore, and that, in the end, the most severe punishment is that which life itself imposes on us. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this episode reveals something that many people ignore in their daily routine. True transformation happens in the moments when we least expect it, often in an almost invisible way, hidden behind the scenes of our most impulsive decisions. The story of young people who tried to run from their own mistake, only to be blindsided by a natural force that turned the tables relentlessly, is a powerful lesson that life, in its subtlest way, is always reminding us that our actions carry a weight we cannot ignore. This force of nature, which manifests itself through the attack of the marimbondos, works as a metaphor for everything that we do not see, but that influences our entire journey. Often we are so focused on our will to escape, to win, to escape the consequences, that we forget that the impact of our decisions is a kind of energy that accumulates and manifests itself at the most unexpected moment, taking its toll directly and definitively. This revelation leads us to reflect on how the mindset of many people is shaped by the understanding that we can control everything around us, that our choices are ours alone, and that the universe does not have an answer or punishment for what we do. But the hidden truth is that no matter how much we try to manipulate or escape the consequences, everything we plant somehow always comes back to us, often in the form of hard lessons, which can come from sources we don't even imagine. And the impact of an impulsive decision, like that poorly planned robbery, may initially seem like a momentary victory, a sense of power and control, but it soon turns into a punishment that comes from a place we could never have predicted. The force of nature, for example, is a manifestation of this hidden truth. It does not discriminate, it does not negotiate, it only reacts to what is disturbed, and often more quickly and severely than we can imagine. It's as if life itself is showing us that the impact of our actions is not just a linear consequence, something that can be accurately measured or predicted. In fact, it is a complex web, where every thread is connected to our attitudes, to our daily choices, to our attitudes of neglect or arrogance. Every impulsive decision, every act of disrespect for the invisible laws of the universe creates an energy that sooner or later comes back to us in one form or another. This energy often does not arrive in a direct way or in a way that we can understand at the time. It manifests itself through events that seem coincidental, but that are actually inevitable consequences. And often, this manifestation comes from a place that is behind the scenes of our consciousness, a hidden truth that we can only see after the storm has passed. This episode teaches us that true transformation occurs when we realize that our actions have an impact that goes beyond the present moment. An impulsive decision, an attitude of arrogance, a negligence, all this builds a kind of invisible legacy that sooner or later reveals itself in the form of a punishment, or a lesson that makes us reflect deeply on who we are and who we want to be. And this lesson, which often arrives violently or unexpectedly, serves to remind us that the universe has its own rules, that the impact of our decisions is a force we can never underestimate, and that no matter how hard we try to escape, what we plant will eventually take its toll. The story of those young people is a clear example that evil often finds its own punishment, and that life, with its quiet wisdom, always finds a way to give back that which was sown with intent to cause harm, often in a way that makes us rethink our entire journey. This revelation is an invitation for all of us to reflect on our own trajectory, on the decisions we make on a day-to-day basis, and on how every act of negligence, arrogance, or impulsiveness can turn into an inevitable lesson. Because deep down, the greatest transformation happens when we understand that life is not a game of absolute control, but a journey of constant learning, where the impact of our decisions silently but relentlessly shapes our path. And by understanding this, we can begin to change our mindset, no longer seeking to escape the consequences, but learning to act with more awareness and respect for the invisible laws that govern our existence. After all, true wisdom lies in recognizing that the impact we make today can become our greatest lesson tomorrow, and that the life force always finds a way to reveal the hidden truth behind what we insist on ignoring. If you made it this far, it's because you really connected with this story and the reflection it brings. This story reminds us that our actions, no matter how simple or impulsive they may seem, carry a weight that we often only realize when it's too late. It is an opportunity to think about our own choices, to realize that life has its own balancing mechanisms, which are not always in our sight, but which always act fairly. If this content made sense to you, how about leaving a comment saying that I'm with you until the end? so we can exchange ideas and strengthen this connection that we have created here. Also take the opportunity to give a like, because this connection that we have built is stronger when you participate, when you share your opinion and show that this type of reflection makes sense in your routine. And if you liked what you've heard so far, there's a video on the side that complements that conversation. Click there and continue with me for another journey of stories and learning. After all, each episode is an opportunity to understand a little more about how the universe works in a light and natural way. I hope to see you in the next video, because we still have many stories that can inspire you to see beyond what seems obvious.